Some hunger is of the body, and some is of the heart. Out on the prairie, folks learned early that an empty cupboard could shame a person worse than a sermon, and a full table could forgive things no tongue was brave enough to name. A loaf of bread was never just bread in those days. It was flour bought on credit, fire coaxed from wet wood, hands that kept working though they trembled, and hope sliced thin enough to last one more morning. This is a memory from Nebraska, from the year 1890, when a hard cattleman learned that a woman guarding her last crust might be guarding something far more precious than food. Dorothy Archer stood inside the leaning doorway of the old lion shack north of Willow Creek, one boot braced against a loose floorboard, both hands wrapped around a bread knife as if it were a pistol. Behind her, on a table made from 2 crates and a split plank, lay a single brown loaf under a faded blue cloth. The loaf was small, flat from poor flour and too much stretching, but the smell of it filled the shack with warmth enough to hurt. Outside, the Nebraska wind drove dust and dry grass against the boards. A sorrel horse stamped near the cottonwoods, and Silas Kincaid stepped down from the saddle with one gloved hand raised. "I am not here to take your food," he said. Dorothy did not lower the knife. "Men always say what they're not here to take," she answered. "Then they count what is left." Silas looked past her only once. A little girl sat near the stove with a shawl around her shoulders, her eyes too large in a thin face. A boy no more than 8 had one arm around a spotted hound and the other hand pressed to his middle like he could hold in the ache of hunger. Silas felt the sight strike him somewhere under the ribs. The stove gave off more smoke than heat. A tin cup sat upside down beside a cracked plate. There were no eggs, no beans, no sack of meal in sight, only that loaf, and Dorothy Archer guarding it with a blade polished, bright from use. If this story finds a soft place in you, tell me where you are watching from. Leave your country in the comments. And if you believe quiet kindness can change a life, please like, share, and subscribe. Now let us go back to that cold doorway and the bread no one wanted to beg for. Silas took off his hat, slow enough not to frighten her. "My name is Silas Kincaid," he said. "Broken K Ranch sits 3 miles south. I know where it sits. You know me. I know your brand. Half the county knows it." Her chin lifted, but the knife shook. She was perhaps 26, perhaps younger. Hunger and weather made age a poor guess. Her dress was dark cotton, mended at both elbows, and her brown hair had been pinned badly, as if she had done it while listening for footsteps. Flour dust marked her wrist, ash smudged one cheek. Her eyes were gray, steady, and full of a pride that had been injured but not killed. Silas looked toward the stove. "Your pipe is near choked," he said. "My pipe is not your concern, no, but smoke will put those children on the floor." At that, the boy stiffened. "We ain't children." Dorothy's mouth tightened. "Will." The boy fell silent. Silas took one step backward instead of forward. "I had a heifer stray this way. Red hide, white face. I saw smoke and came to ask. No cow here. I can see that. You can see too much." He accepted the rebuke because it was true. A man with a ranch, even a worried one, had no clean right to stand in a poor woman's doorway and measure her lack. Silas put his hat back on. "I will ride." Dorothy watched him, suspicious as a hawk. He went to his horse, untied the canvas sack from behind his saddle, and returned only close enough to set it on the ground outside the threshold. When he opened it, the smell of coffee came out, then salt pork wrapped in paper, a pouch of beans, a heel of cheese, and half a sack of flour. Dorothy's face changed so quickly she tried to hide it. Not gratitude first, fear. "I did not ask. I know. I will not owe you. You do not. That is not how men do kindness." Silas looked toward the children, then back at her. "I have not done much of it. My baby, I am poor at the terms." The girl near the stove whispered, "Dottie." Dorothy did not turn. Her fingers whitened around the knife. Silas reached into his coat pocket and took out a small paper twist. "Peppermint," he said, setting it on top of the sack. "From Mrs. Val's store. Bought it last week. Forgot it was there." The little girl leaned forward before she could stop herself. Dorothy saw it, and the pride in her face suffered. Silas turned away first. "Pipe needs clearing from the outside. Wind is pushing wrong through the cap. I can fix it and leave." "Why?" The question held more than suspicion. It held every door shut in her face, every price named over her head, every favor that had come with a hand reaching too far. Silas did not answer quickly. "Because children should not breathe smoke," he said at last. "And because I remember being hungry for the first time." Dorothy looked uncertain. He went around the shack and found the stovepipe patched with wire and clay, nearly plugged with soot and a bird's nest. He worked with a stick and his knife until black flakes fell loose. The wind bit through his coat. His hands went numb. By the time he returned to the front, smoke was drawing clean, and Dorothy had moved the sack inside, but had not opened it. The loaf still sat beneath the blue cloth. He understood then. The fruit he brought was not yet food. It was a test. It might have strings hidden inside it like burrs. He mounted and turned his horse toward the south. "Miss Archer," he said. She stood framed by the doorway. "Your children, my sisters. Your sister buried near Kearney." Silas lowered his eyes once. "I am sorry." Dorothy gave a small nod, so stiff it was almost not a nod at all. He rode away with the wind in his face and the image of that bread knife in his mind. The Broken K was not a pretty ranch, though it was a large one. It had been built by men who believed square corners wasted time. The house sat low against the prairie, with a porch that sagged on the east end and a kitchen that smelled mostly of coffee, leather, and silence. Corrals spread behind it like weathered ribs. A barn leaned but did not fall. There was a pump that complained every morning, a garden plot gone to weeds, a woodpile that never seemed high enough, and a line of cottonwoods planted by Silas' mother before fever took her. Silas had inherited the ranch at 22 and grief with it. By 34, he had learned to run cattle, read weather, set a bone, and sleep light. He had not learned how to keep a house from feeling empty. His hired men ate in the bunkhouse. He took meals alone when he remembered to take them at all. Coffee burned in the pot. Bread came from town when someone rode in. Most evenings, he stood by the kitchen window with a tin cup in hand and watched the yard darken, as if he expected some voice from the past to call him in. That night, he sat at the rough table while the wind pressed against the walls. A ledger lay open before him. Numbers marched across the page, like soldiers in a war he was losing. 200 head weakened by summer drought. A mortgage note due by Christmas. Bank interest added by Edwin Pruitt with a smile that never reached his eyes. Fence repairs, winter feed, a broken windmill. 3 hands to pay. And now a woman in an abandoned shack guarding bread. Silas shut the ledger and leaned back. His foreman, Amos Bell, came in without knocking, as most old friends do. "Found your heifer," Amos said. "She dropped a calf in the north draw, mean little thing, both living. Good." Amos hung his coat on a peg and squinted at him. "You look like a man who swallowed a nail." Passed by the old Archer place. Amos' face shifted. "Somebody in it?" "Dorothy Archer, 2 children, no food to speak of." Archer." Amos rubbed his jaw. "Old Jonah Archer's kin, my bay, thought that families scattered after Jonah died. Not all." Amos sat down across from him. "That shack ain't fit for a coyote. Roof'll go in a wet snow." Silas knew it. The wind pushed again. The lamp flame leaned. Amos watched him. "You going to bring them here?" "No." Sounded like you were thinking it. "I was thinking the town should have seen to them. The town sees what it wants." Widow Briggs takes soup if folks are watching. Pruitt takes land if they ain't. Silas' mouth hardened at the banker's name. Amos leaned forward. "You know Pruitt has been asking after your south pasture." "He has asked after everything I own. He will take it if you miss that note." Silas stood and carried his cup to the stove. The coffee had gone bitter. He drank it anyway. Next morning came with low clouds and a cold that seemed to rise from the ground. Silas loaded his wagon with split wood, a sack of potatoes, lamp oil, a blanket, and 2 jars of peaches left from a summer church supper he had never opened. He told himself he was doing what any decent neighbor would. He told himself that until he reached the archer's shack and saw Dorothy outside, swinging an axe at a twisted cottonwood limb with more determination than strength. Her hands were red. The boy, Will, gathered chips in a bucket. The little girl, Lottie, tried to hold the hound away from the axe. Dorothy stopped when the wagon rattled in. Silas climbed down. "Morning, you again?" "Yes." She looked at the wagon bed. "No, you do not know what I'm going to say. You brought enough to make saying no harder." He almost smiled, but her face stopped him. "The north fence on my place needs mending," he said. "I am short of hands in the yard. The bunkhouse cook left last month. I can pay wages for kitchen work and light chores. There's a room off the pantry. Children can sleep there until you find better." Her expression closed. "I am not for hire in that way." His jaw tightened, not at her accusation, but at the world that had taught her to make it. "I meant cooking," he said. "Laundry if you choose, mending if you choose. Wages written in my ledger and paid every Saturday. Door latch on your side. You keep your name and your business." Dorothy stared at him. Will stepped closer to her skirt. Lottie looked at the wagon with open longing, especially at the blanket. Dorothy's gaze followed and pain moved through her face. "I will not be pitied," she said. "No, I will not be questioned. No, I will not have those children spoken down to. No, and I will not be told that gratitude means obedience." Silas took off one glove and held his bare hand up, palm out. No, something in the simple repetition unsettled her more than argument might have. "What wages? $5 a month, room board, and a share of winter stores. That is too much. It is less than a cook costs me when I can find one. I am not a cook." "Can you make bread?" Her eyes moved, just once, toward the shack and the loaf inside. "Yes," she said. "Then you are already better than me," Will muttered. "Anyone is." Dorothy turned. "Will," Silas looked at the boy. "True enough." Lottie smiled before hiding it in the hound's fur. Dorothy did not agree that morning. She let him stack the wood beneath the eave only after. He said it was payment for the smoke pipe repair he had not been paid for. She took the blanket only because Lottie had coughed twice, and Dorothy could not pretend not to hear it. She refused the peaches until Silas set them beside Will and told him the jars needed returning later. A child's duty could sometimes pass where charity could not. On the 3rd day, snow threatened. Silas came again and found Dorothy on the roof, trying to nail a square of feed sack over a widening gap. Her skirt whipped in the wind. Will stood below with nails in his mouth. Lottie cried because she had been told not to climb the ladder. Silas did not ask permission. He crossed the yard fast. "Come down." Dorothy looked over her shoulder. "I have it. The board beneath your foot is rotten." I said, "I have it." The board cracked. Silas reached the ladder as she dropped hard to one knee, catching herself by the roof edge. The hammer slid off and struck the dirt near his boot. For 1 second, neither moved. Then Lottie screamed. Silas climbed halfway up. Dorothy. Her face had gone white. He did not say, "I told you." He did not curse. He did not grab. "Put your hand on my shoulder," he said. She looked at him as if the act itself might cost her something. "Now," he said, softer. She put one hand on his shoulder. He steadied her down the ladder one rung at a time. When her boots touched earth, she pulled away at once and turned to Lottie. "I am fine. You are bleeding," Will said. A thin red line ran along her wrist where a nail had torn skin. "It is nothing." Silas picked up the hammer. "Pack what you need. No. He looked at the roof, then at the darkening sky. That shack will not hold snow. I said no. Then I will bring men and mend it before night. You cannot. Why? She looked cornered. Her eyes flashed to the floor inside the shack, then to the small trunk near the bedroll, then back to him. It was the first clue, though Silas did not yet know how to read it. There are things here, she said. Private things. I will not touch them. Men say that too. Silas absorbed the blow. Then you carry them. I will turn my back. She looked toward the children. Lottie's cough came again, small and wet. Dorothy closed her eyes, and the fight went out of her shoulders. Only until the snow passes, she said. Only until the snow passes, he agreed. It took less than an hour to load their lives into the wagon. A trunk with a cracked leather strap, 2 quilts thin from washing, a Bible wrapped in cloth, a chip bowl, 3 dresses, a small packet of papers, Dorothy tucked inside her bodice when she thought no one watched, and the blue cloth, folded carefully around what remained of the last loaf. Silas saw but said nothing. At the broken quay, the hired men came out of the bunkhouse to stare. Amos silenced them with one look. This is Miss Archer, Silas said. And Will and Lottie Ray. They will be staying in the pantry room and helping in the house. Any man who forgets his manners can draw pay and leave. The men found sudden interest in their boots. Dorothy stood straight, one hand on Lottie's shoulder. The yard must have seemed too open, the house too strange, the eyes too many. Silas took their trunk himself and carried it inside. The pantry room had once been used for storing apples in jars. It was narrow but dry, with a small window facing the garden plot. Silas had put 2 rope cots inside, a washstand, and a chair with a split seat he had mended badly. On the stove in the kitchen, coffee waited. A pot of beans warmed beside it. A loaf from town sat on the table, uncut. Dorothy stopped at the sight of it. Silas set the trunk down. You can use the kitchen as you need. She walked to the table and touched the bread, not taking it, only pressing one finger to the crust, as if to learn whether it was real. Will stood rigid, trying not to stare. Lottie whispered, Is it for us? Dorothy's mouth trembled once before she caught it. She looked at Silas. He took down 4 plates. It is supper, he said. That first meal was quiet. The children ate carefully at first, then too fast. Dorothy slowed them with a look, though hunger made her own hands unsteady. She put half her portion on Lottie's plate when she thought Silas did not see. He reached for the pot and filled Dorothy's plate again without speaking. She froze. He sat back down, eyes lowered to his own beans. No one mentioned it. After supper, Dorothy rose and began gathering dishes. You do not have to start tonight, Silas said. I ate tonight. Was not a bargain per plate. She turned with a stack of tin plates in her hands. Work steadies me. He understood that better than comfort. The pump handle sticks, he said. Use both hands or it will bite. I have used a pump. I expect you have. She carried the dishes outside. Through the window, he saw her work the pump with sharp, angry strokes until water splashed into the basin. After a moment, Will joined her with a drying rag. Lottie sat on the steps, wrapped in the new blanket, the hound at her feet. The kitchen changed before the week ended. It did not become soft all at once. Dorothy was not the kind of woman who entered a house and made herself at home by pretending the house had always wanted her. She moved like a guest who expected to be evicted. She kept her trunk locked. She slept with the children in the pantry room, though Silas offered the spare bedroom. She counted every sack of flour used and wrote it in a small notebook. She asked for wages in coins and placed them in a cloth purse tied under her skirt. But the stove began to shine. The coffee was no longer boiled to bitterness. Red rose beneath a towel by the warmest corner. Dirty dishes stopped gathering in the sink. The table was scrubbed until old knife marks showed pale. A cracked curtain was washed and rehung. A jar of dried prairie flowers appeared on the windowsill, though no one admitted putting them there. Silas noticed each change the way a man notices spring after a long winter, first with suspicion, then with hunger. He came in from the corral one evening to find Dorothy kneeling by the stove, one arm deep in the firebox, scraping ash into a bucket. Her sleeves were rolled to the elbow. A strand of hair had fallen across her cheek. "You will burn yourself," he said. "I know how not to. The damper catches. I fixed it." He looked. She had. A bent nail had been replaced with a smooth piece of wire, twisted neatly. He stood there too long. Dorothy sat back on her heels. Was there something else? No. She rose and brushed ash from her skirt. "You look disappointed for a man whose stove works. I am not used to things improving without a bill following." Fen enjoyed the pause before Saturday. He almost smiled again. This time, she almost did too. The children changed differently. Will distrusted Silas with a boy's fierce loyalty to all that had hurt his aunt. He watched every motion Silas made near Dorothy. If Silas lifted a bucket, Will tried to lift too. If Silas chopped wood, Will gathered chips until his fingers turned blue. If the men laughed in the yard, Will turned his body between the sound and the kitchen window. Silas did not scold him. He gave him work. "Hold this gate. Count those nails. Carry this feed scoop. But do not spill it unless you want the hens to love you more than is decent." Will remained solemn, but he began to stand nearer. Lottie took to the ranch as a hungry plant takes rain. She fed the hens, named every one, and cried when one pecked her. She followed Amos until he let her sit on the fence and watch him curry the horses. She asked questions about everything. "Do cows dream? Do your horses know Sunday? Did your mother plant those trees?" That last question was to Silas. He had been tightening a harness strap. His hands stopped. "Ira." "Yes," he said. "Where is she?" "Gone, like Mama." "Yes." Lottie considered this. Dottie says gone does not mean nothing. It means love has to live somewhere else. Silas looked toward the kitchen where Dorothy was rolling dough. "She told you that? When I cried at night?" Silas bent over the strap again. "She is likely right. The first town trouble came on a Saturday. Dorothy insisted on going into Willow Creek herself to buy thread, yeast, and school slates for the children. Silas hitched the wagon. She climbed up beside him with a list folded in her glove, her gray dress brushed clean, her bonnet tied tight beneath her chin. Will and Lottie rode in back, sitting on a feed sack, their eyes bright at the thought of town. The main street of Willow Creek was 2 rows of false front buildings facing dust, wagon ruts, and each other. A church bell hung in a square white steeple. The mercantile smelled of molasses, lamp oil, cloves, and wool. Men near the blacksmith stopped speaking when Silas drove in with Dorothy Archer on his wagon seat. Dorothy felt it. Her back became straighter. Mrs. Vale, the storekeeper's wife, greeted Silas warmly and Dorothy carefully. "Well," Mrs. Vale said, "Miss Archer, I heard you had taken a position." I have. At Broken K.I.S. The words stood between them like laundry on a line, every piece visible. Silas moved toward the flour sacks, but Dorothy lifted her list. "I can manage." He let her. At the counter, Edwin Pruitt entered with his polished boots and city-cut coat. Though no city had claimed him in 20 years, he was narrow-faced, with a trimmed mustache and pale hands that looked uncomfortable near honest labor. He removed his hat when he saw Dorothy. "Miss Archer," he said, "I was told you had gone missing. I was never yours to find. A few customers heard and turned." Pruitt smiled thinly. "Still sharp? Your uncle had that quality. It did him no favor." Dorothy's hand closed around the spool of thread. Silas moved nearer without appearing to. Pruitt glanced at him. "Kincaid, I see you are collecting strays now." The store quieted. Will, standing by the cracker barrel, flushed dark red. Dorothy set her coins on the counter one by one. "Mrs. Vale, how much for the thread, yeast, and 2 slates?" Mrs. Vale named a price. Dorothy counted again. She was short by 3 cents. The small silence that followed was crueler than laughter. Dorothy stared at the coins, as if she could will them to multiply. Pruitt reached into his vest pocket and placed a nickel on the counter. "Allow me," he said. Dorothy did not touch it. "No, it is only 5 cents. No, pride is expensive for a woman in your position." Silas picked up the nickel and placed it back in Pruitt's palm. "Then you keep it," Silas said. "You can afford pride better than most." Pruitt's eyes cooled. "Careful, Kincaid. Your note is not paid with temper. No, it will be paid with cattle. If weather holds, if markets hold, if old boundaries hold." Dorothy looked up sharply at that. Silas saw it. Pruitt smiled again, as if he had meant her to hear. Dorothy removed 1 slate from the counter. "One will do." Will opened his mouth, but she gave him a look. Silas wanted to pay the 3 cents. Every part of him wanted to set down $1 and end the humiliation. But he remembered the bread knife, and the way she had said gratitude did not mean obedience. So he did something harder. Nothing. Outside, Dorothy climbed into the wagon without help. Will sat stiff and furious. Lottie held the single slate in both hands like a treasure that hurt. Silas drove out of town. "Half a mile down the road," Dorothy said. "Thank you for not paying. It cost you a slate. It saved me something dearer." He nodded once. After a while, Will said from the wagon bed, "I can share." Lottie leaned against him. "I know." Dorothy turned her face toward the prairie, and Silas pretended not to see her wipe one eye with the heel of her glove. That night, Dorothy stayed up after the children slept. Silas came in from checking a restless mare and found a lamp burning low in the kitchen. Dorothy sat at the table with a stack of mending, but her needle was still. The blue cloth from the old shack lay beside her. Wrapped inside it was not bread now. It held papers. Silas stopped in the doorway. Dorothy folded the cloth quickly. "I did not mean to intrude," he said. "You live here. So do you." She looked at him unsettled by the sentence. He crossed to the stove and poured coffee. Pruitt spoke of boundaries today. Her hands rested on the folded cloth. "He likes words that make people afraid." "Did he make you afraid?" Dorothy gave a small laugh with no humor. "Mr. Pruitt has never had to make me anything. He only arrives where fear already is." Silas sat opposite her, leaving the width of the table between them. "Your uncle was Jonah Archer." "Yes, he kept records. He kept everything. Births, deaths, brands, claims, water rights, debts paid, debts invented. If a man signed his name in this county, Uncle Jonah could usually find the ink. That's why Pruitt disliked him." Dorothy looked down. "Pruitt dislikes any lock he does not hold the key to." Silas waited. She ran one finger along the edge of the blue cloth. "My uncle died owing money. At least that is what Pruitt said. He took the house, the office, most of the furniture. Papers disappeared. People stopped visiting. It is a strange thing, Mr. Kincaid, how fast friends lose their way to a poor door." "Silas," he said quietly. She looked up. "My name is Silas." For a moment, the lamp hummed. Wind moved against the glass. "Dorothy," she said, and it was not introduction but permission. He held the coffee cup in both hands. "Did your uncle owe him?" "I do not know." "Do those papers say?" Her face closed again, not hard, only tired. "They say enough to make me unwelcome. I will not ask to see them." "Why not?" "Because you are not ready to show me." The line stayed in the room after he spoke it. Dorothy touched the cloth again. "That is a rare kind of patience." "No, I have little patience. I am only learning where not to put my hands." Her eyes softened, then turned away. She picked up her needle. "Your cuff is torn." He looked at his sleeve. He had not noticed. "Leave it by the stove," she said. I will mend it after the children's stockings. You mend too much, you tear too much, this time. They both almost smiled. Snow came early that year, not deep at first, but mean. It crusted the yard and silvered the fence rails. The cattle grew restless, pushing toward the lower draws where grass still showed. Silas and the men rode before dawn and returned after dark with ice in their mustaches and mud to their knees. Dorothy learned the rhythm of them: coffee before light, biscuits wrapped in cloth for saddle pockets, beans kept warm for whichever man came in late, bandages boiled when a hand caught wire, socks hung near the stove, a kettle always ready, silence when men were too tired for talk. She did not mother them. The hired men would not have known what to do with that. She simply made the house function, as if human beings might enter it and live. One evening, Amos came in with a cut above his eye where a gate had swung back. Dorothy pointed to a chair. "Sit down," Os blinked. "It is a scratch." "Sit." He sat. She cleaned the wound with water and carbolic, then pressed cloth to it, while he hissed through his teeth. "You have the hands of a nurse," he said. "My mother was a midwife. And your father?" The cloth paused. "A surveyor," she said. Silas, standing by the door, heard it. Dorothy did not look at him. Amos said, "Useful traits? Not useful enough to keep either of them living." No one answered. Later, when Amos had gone and the children were asleep, Silas found Dorothy standing on the back porch. The moon made the snow blue. She wore a shawl over her shoulders and held a folded letter in one hand. "You will freeze," he said. I was already cold. He leaned against the porch post, leaving space. "Your father surveyed land?" "Yes, for the county, for whoever paid and sometimes for those who could not. He believed lines mattered." Silas looked out toward the pastures. "They do. He used to say a line on paper could protect a widow better than a shotgun if the paper was kept safe." "Was it?" Dorothy folded the letter smaller. "Not safe enough." A coyote cried far off. The sound moved over the prairie like a lonely wheel. "My father died when I was 14, she said. "A horse stepped in a badger hole. He lived 2 days. Uncle Jonah took me in. Then my sister came west with her husband. Then fever took them both, and I had Will and Lottie. Every time I learned one table, it was taken from me." Silas' throat tightened. He thought of his mother's cottonwoods, his father's belt hanging by the door for 6 months after he died because Silas could not make himself move it. His younger brother, Matthew, riding out angry one spring and coming home in a wagon after a flood took the bridge. The empty chairs had trained him too. "I had a brother," Silas said. Dorothy turned slightly. "Matthew, younger, better with people, worse with horses. He wanted to sell part of this place and open a livery in town. We fought over it the night before he died." She said nothing, which let him continue. "He took the gray mare out in a storm. Bridge was flooded. They found him 2 days later." Dorothy's voice was low. "You think the fight sent him out?" "I know it did. You do not know that?" "I was the last thing he heard before the water." Dorothy looked across the snowy yard. Her breath showed white. "My sister asked me to come live with her months before she died," she said. "I did not. I was tired of being needed. Then fever came, and by the time I reached her, she could not lift her head. We are cruelest to ourselves with the things we cannot repair." Silas looked at her then. She did not comfort him. She stood beside him in the cold and offered truth instead. After a while, she held out a tin cup she had kept beneath her shawl. "Coffee," she said. He took it. It was still warm. Something in him bent under the small mercy. The trouble with Pruitt worsened as Christmas neared. First came a letter stamped by the bank, reminding Silas that the mortgage note would mature on December 24th. Then a rumor spread that the south pasture of Broken K had been improperly recorded after the old county office fire. Then Pruitt appeared at the ranch with Deputy Harlan and 2 men Silas recognized as buyers from the railroad. stockyards. Dorothy saw them from the kitchen window. Silas met them in the yard. Pruitt held a leather portfolio beneath one arm. His smile looked polished for the occasion. "Kincaid," he said, "cold morning. What do you want?" "Direct as ever. I have come to discuss a solution. I do not need one from you. On the contrary, you need one badly. Your note is due in 9 days. Cattle prices have dipped. Winter loss will reduce your herd. And there remains the matter of your south boundary. My boundary is fenced. Fences wander. Records matter." Dorothy stood inside the kitchen, one hand on the curtain. Will and Lottie were at the table, copying letters on the slate. Will watched her face instead of his work. Pruitt continued, "It appears the deed description from 1878 does not include the lower spring draw. Without that draw, your winter water is insufficient. Without water, this ranch cannot carry a herd. However, I am willing to purchase the disputed section and restructure your debt." Silas stared at him. "You mean take my water and rent it back?" "I mean save you from foreclosure." "You mean bleed me," standing up instead of lying down. Deputy Harlan shifted uncomfortably. One of the buyers laughed under his breath. Dorothy's hand tightened on the curtain. Pruitt's eyes moved to the house and found her. Miss Archer might understand the danger of clinging to papers one has not properly secured. Silas stepped slightly, blocking his view. "Do not speak to her through my window." Pruitt's smile thinned. "Careful. Public temper harms a man's reputation." "My reputation has survived worse company." Pruitt opened the portfolio. "I have copies of the county abstract. The lower spring draw was first claimed by a Thomas Bellwether and later assigned to the bank after unpaid taxes. Your father grazed it by neighborly mistake. Mistake does not create ownership. Silas' father had watered cattle at that spring for 30 years. Silas had repaired the trough there as a boy. His mother had planted willows along it. The idea of Pruitt owning it made the earth seem to tilt. "Leave." Silas sat. Pruitt closed the portfolio. 9 days. He turned to go, then paused. "You might ask Miss Archer what happens when a family mistakes possession for proof." Silas waited until the men rode out. Then he walked to the barn and drove his fist into a post hard enough to split skin. Dorothy found him there 10 minutes later, wrapping his hand badly with a strip torn from his own handkerchief. "Give it here," she said. "It is fine. It is bleeding through." He let her take his hand. She unwound the cloth. His knuckles were cut, already swelling. "Posts rarely apologize," she said. "Neither do bankers." She cleaned the cuts. He hissed once. "Did he tell the truth?" she asked. "About the abstract?" "I do not know. My father handled the papers. Jonah Archer recorded the deed. Then the county office burned in 82. Copies were made from what could be salvaged. My uncle said the fire was convenient." Silas looked at her. Dorothy kept her eyes on his hand. "I heard him say it once. I was young. He stopped talking when he saw me. You think Pruitt burned records? I think men who profit from ashes should be watched near matches." She wrapped his hand cleanly. Silas spoke low. "You know something. I know pieces." "Dorothy." She tied the bandage and stepped back. "I cannot help you with pieces." "Why?" "Because if I'm wrong, I give you hope that breaks your ranch harder when it falls. And if I am right, Pruitt will come for what I have left. I can protect you." The words came too fast. Her face changed. "No," she said softly. "You can stand near me. You can be kind. You can put food on a table. But do not promise what men with money and law can still take." She left him in the barn with his bandaged hand and the smell of hay around him. That night, Dorothy did not sleep. She sat on the pantry room floor after the children drifted off, her trunk open before her. Inside were folded dresses, her sister's Bible, a packet of coins, and beneath a false bottom, the papers she had carried from the old shack, a letter from her father to Jonah Archer, a copy of a survey map, a torn tax receipt, a brand registration for Broken K, witnessed by her uncle, and a page with the name Thomas Bellwether crossed out, and another written beneath it in different ink. She has spent months trying to understand what she held. Hunger had made reading hard. Fear had made it harder. If she took the papers to town, Pruitt might seize them as part of her uncle's debt. If she gave them to Silas and they proved worthless, she would have traded safety for shame. If they proved useful, the whole county would know Dorothy Archer had hidden records while a man's ranch nearly died. But the kitchen beyond the door held the smell of bread she had baked from Silas' flour. Lottie slept under his roof without coughing. Will had laughed that afternoon when a hen stole a biscuit from Amos' plate. Silas had not touched her trunk, had not asked to count her past, had not paid 3 cents to make himself generous. Dorothy unfolded the blue cloth. The last crumbs of the old loaf were gone, but the cloth still carried a faint smell of smoke and bread. She pressed it to her mouth and closed her eyes. In the morning, she began searching the house. Not openly. She dusted shelves in Silas F. Father's office, a small room off the parlor that had not been properly used in years. She cleaned mouse leavings from drawers, shook out old envelopes, stacked brittle receipts by year. Silas watched from the doorway once, puzzled. "That room is a graveyard," he said. "Graveyards hold names." He did not ask more. For 3 days, Dorothy worked when chores allowed. She cooked, pumped water, fed hens, helped Lottie hem a towel, corrected Will's letters, and then returned to the office. Dust streaked her face. Ink stained her finger. She found bills of sale, cattle counts, seed orders, a photograph of Silas' parents, standing stiff and unsmiling before the first barn, and a child's drawing of a horse labeled Matthew in crooked letters. She placed the drawing on Silas's desk. When he found it, he stood still for a long time. Then he folded it carefully and put it in his coat pocket. On the 4th evening, Dorothy found a ledger. It had slipped behind a loose backing in the bottom drawer. The cover was warped from old damp, and the pages smelled of mildew. Across the first page, in faded ink, was written, "Kincaid and Archer Survey Notes, 1878. Her heart began to pound. She carried it to the kitchen, where Silas was towing near the stove. "Where did this come from?" she asked. He looked at the ledger. "I have never seen it." "It was in your father's office." He stood. "What is it?" Dorothy opened to the marked page. There, in Jonah Archer's precise hand, was a description of the south boundary, from the split cottonwood east to the lower spring, thence along the draw to the stone ridge, including water access and grazing basin by purchase from Thomas Bellwether. Paid in full by alias Kincaid. Paid in full. Silas stared. Dorothy's finger moved to the witness line. "Jonah Archer witnessed it," she said. "So did my father." Silas did not speak. "There should be a deed copy," she continued. "Might be in county records. Might be burned. But this ledger confirms payment. Pruitt has an assignment from Bellwether. Then Bellwether sold what he no longer owned." Silas looked at her, and something like light came into his face. Then caution covered it. "Is it enough?" "Not alone." Her voice trembled, but not from fear this time. From the nearness of answer. "I have more," she said. She brought the blue cloth from the pantry and laid out the papers on the kitchen table. Silas did not reach for them until she nodded. He read slowly. Once, twice, the children felt the change and came near. "What is it?" Will asked. Dorothy placed a hand on his shoulder. "A line that might matter." Silas looked up from the documents. "Dorothy, why did you not show me sooner?" There was no anger in his voice, but shame rose in her anyway. "Because every paper in my hands has cost me something. My uncle was called a cheat after he died. My father's maps were taken. My sister's debts were counted twice, because I could not prove payment. I thought if I held the papers long enough, I could keep one thing from being stolen. Silas looked at the blue cloth, at the careful creases. "The bread," he said. She swallowed. "When you found me, those papers were under the loaf. I thought a hungry woman's table was the last place any man would look for proof." Silas sat down slowly. The stove cracked. Snow brushed the window. The children stood silent. Dorothy gathered herself. "There is another thing." Silas waited. "My father's name is on the survey. The county might require a living witness to his hand. Uncle Jonah is dead, but I know it. I learned letters from that hand. I copied maps beside him. I can swear to it. Pruitt will try to ruin you. He has already tried. He will say you hid evidence. I did to survive." She looked straight at him. Yes, the word was bare and brave. Silas walked around the table and stopped before her. He did not touch her. "One simple question," he said. "Do you want to fight him?" Dorothy looked toward Will and Lottie, then at the kitchen she had cleaned, the bread cooling by the stove, the bandage she had tied on Silas' hand, the coffee she had kept warm. Without admitting, she knew when he would come in. "Yes," she said. Silas nodded. "Then we fight." The hearing was set for Christmas Eve morning in the Willow Creek Church Hall because the courthouse room was too small for the number of people who wanted to witness a ranch nearly lost. By then, gossip had done its work. Some said Dorothy Archer had stolen papers from her uncle's office. Some said Silas Kincaid had brought her into his house for reasons no decent woman would name. Some said Pruitt had found a clear defect in the broken kettle and was only enforcing law. Others remembered Jonah Archer's honesty, but said memory did not pay taxes. Dorothy heard most of it before she entered the hall. She wore her gray dress, brushed clean again, with a white collar she had washed late the night before. Her gloves were mended. Her bonnet was plain. In her arms, wrapped in blue cloth, she carried the documents. Silas walked beside her, not ahead. Will and Lottie followed with Amos. The children had begged to come. Dorothy had refused twice and relented when Will said, "If they talk against you, I want them seeing us hear it and not run." The church hall smelled of pine boards, damp wool, and coal smoke. A potbelly stove glowed in the corner. Folding chairs had been set in rows. At the front, Judge Merriweather sat behind a table with spectacles low on his nose. Pruitt stood with his lawyer, Mr. Klain, a sleek man from Omaha, whose collar looked sharp enough to cut. Silas' jaw was tight. Dorothy leaned close enough that only he could hear. "Do not strike anyone in a church hall." His mouth moved, almost a smile. "I will try to honor the building." They sat. The hearing began with Pruitt's lawyer speaking at length about defects, assignments, unpaid taxes, uncertain boundaries, and the bank's generous willingness to resolve the matter. His words were smooth and cold. They made thefts sound like housekeeping. Then Silas was called. He spoke plainly. His father had purchased the land. Broken K had used the spring draw for 12 years without challenge. Taxes had been paid as part of the ranch parcel. The fence had stood where it stood since before the fire. Mr. Klain rose. "Do you possess the original deed?" "No." "Was it destroyed in the county office fire?" "I do not know." "Ah, so your claim depends on memory, habit, and fence wire." Silas looked at him. "And payment?" "Payment you cannot prove." Silas' eyes moved to Dorothy. "Not alone," he said. Whispers rose. Dorothy was caught next. Walking to the front felt longer than the prairie road from the shack. She heard a woman whisper her name. She heard Pruitt clear his throat. She heard Lottie sniffle and Will whisper, "Stand straight," though she already was. Judge Merriweather looked kindly but tired. "State your name." "Dorothy Archer, relation to Jonah Archer. He was my uncle, and to Henry Archer, surveyor, my father." Mr. Klain stood. "Miss Archer, before testimony proceeds, I ask the court to consider whether this witness has an interest in protecting her current employer." "Silas," shifted in his chair. Dorothy answered before the judge could. I have an interest in telling the truth. Mr. Klein smiled. Truth often benefits the table one eats at. Dorothy felt heat rise in her face. There it was. The loaf, the kitchen, the old shame dressed up for public viewing. Silas stood. Judge Merriweather struck the table with a small gavel. Mr. Kincaid. Silas remained standing one breath too long. Then he said, Her dignity is not evidence for you to handle. The room fell silent. Dorothy did not look at him, because if she did, she might not keep her composure. The judge's eyes sharpened. Mr. Klein, keep to documents. Dorothy laid the blue cloth on the table and unfolded it. These papers were kept by my uncle after the county fire, she said. Some were in his office when Mr. Pruitt took possession after my uncle's death. These were not because my uncle had given them to me in a packet of family papers before he died. At the time, I did not understand their full bearing. Pruitt's face had gone still. Dorothy presented the survey map first, then the tax receipt, then the letter from her father to Jonah. Finally, the ledger found in Silas' house. Judge Merriweather examined each one. Mr. Klein objected to the ledger. Dorothy explained where it had been found. Silas confirmed. Amos confirmed the office had not been altered for years. Mrs. Vale, to everyone's surprise, stood and said she remembered Jonah Archer arguing with Pruitt after the fire about missing bellwether papers. Pruitt's smile vanished. Then came the brand record. Dorothy had nearly overlooked its importance until the night before. On the back of the broken K brand registration was a handwritten note in Jonah Archer's hand. Bellwether transfer completed. Spring draw included. Pruitt, Tron, Amty filed. Judge Merriweather read the line twice. Mr. Pruitt, he said. Were you present? Pruitt adjusted his cuff. I was a young clerk. I cannot be expected to recall every routine filing. Dorothy looked at him. But you recalled enough to claim the paper missing. The judge glanced over his spectacles. Miss Archer, she lowered her eyes. Forgive me. But the room had heard. Mr. Klein tried to recover. He questioned the handwriting. Dorothy identified her uncle's hand. He questioned her father's map. She described the marks her father made when measuring water. Double ticks for a spring, a curved line for seasonal flow, red ink for disputed boundaries. The judge asked how she knew. Dorothy's voice steadied. My father taught me by lamplight. He said land is not only acres, it is where a woman draws water, where cattle live through winter, where children know the road home. A false line can starve a family as surely as drought. No one whispered then. Silas sat with his bandaged hand closed on his knee. Mr. Klein made one final attempt. Miss Archer, is it not true that at the time Mr. Kincaid found you, you were destitute? The word landed hard. Dorothy stood very still. Yes, hungry, eyes dependent on his charity. Silas rose again, but Dorothy lifted one hand slightly. He stopped. She turned to Mr. Klein. I was hungry, she said. The children were hungry. I was guarding our last loaf of bread when Mr. Kincaid came to the door. He did not buy me with flour. He did not own me with shelter. He offered work, wages, and a latch on my side of the door. If you mean to shame me with hunger, sir, you will have to shame half this county, because most of us have met it in one winter or another. A sound moved through the hall. Not applause, something deeper, a shifting of conscience. Dorothy continued, her voice quieter. I kept those papers because I was afraid. I bring them now because fear has already cost too much. Silas looked at her as if seeing the whole of her at last. Not only hunger, not only pride, but the fierce intelligence and courage that had kept children alive and records safe under a loaf of bread. Judge Merriweather took an hour. People murmured. Pruitt stood rigid near the stove. Dorothy returned to her seat, and Lottie climbed into her lap despite being too old for it. Dorothy held her. Silas leaned close. You did not have to say all that, "Ah, yes," she said, "I did." His hand rested on the bench between them, not touching, waiting. After a while, Dorothy placed her gloved fingers over his, only for a moment, but neither moved away. When the judge returned, the room quieted. The bellwether assignment claimed by the bank was invalid. As to the spring draw, the Broken K boundary, including the lower spring and grazing basin, was upheld. Further inquiry would be opened into altered records after the county fire. The bank could not seize or encumber the disputed land. The ranch was saved, not entirely. The mortgage notes still existed. Winter still waited. Cattle still needed feed. But the water remained. Without that spring, Broken K would have died by January. With it, there was a fighting chance. Silas bowed his head once. Dorothy closed her eyes. Will whispered, "Dottie, you did it." She held Lottie tighter. "We did not lose." Outside the hall, Pruitt approached them on the church steps. Snow had begun to fall, soft and fine. "This is not finished," he said. Silas stepped forward, but Dorothy touched his sleeve. She faced Pruitt herself. "Ah, yes," she said. "Is. You think a few old papers make you safe? No, but they make you afraid." His face darkened. Dorothy continued. "You took my uncle's office. You took my furniture. You took my good name where you could. You will not take this ranch." Pruitt looked at Silas. "You let her speak for you now?" Silas glanced at Dorothy, then back at him. "When she knows the truth better than I do, yes?" That answer struck harder than any fist. Pruitt walked away into the falling snow. Christmas Eve settled over Willow Creek, with church bells and wagon wheels creaking through white streets. Mrs. Vale came to Dorothy before they left and pressed something into her hand. 3 cents. Dorothy stared. Mrs. Vale's eyes were wet. "For the slate I should have trusted you with." Dorothy closed her fingers around the coins. "Thank you," she said, not because she needed the money now, because apology, like bread, had to be received before it could nourish. The ride home was quiet. Will and Lottie slept against each other in the wagon bed beneath a quilt. Amos rode behind, humming some hymn under his breath. Snow gathered on Silas' shoulders and Dorothy's bonnet. Halfway home, Silas stopped the wagon near the rise where the Broken K spread below them. Dark buildings, pale fields, cottonwoods bare against the sky. Dorothy looked at him. "Something wrong?" "No." He held the reins loosely. "I cannot pay the full note by morning," he said. "I know. I might still have to sell cattle at a loss. I know. The house roof leaks over the parlor. The pump handle sticks. The east fence is a disgrace. The garden is dead. The barn door needs rehanging. That is a long courtship speech, Mr. Kincaid." He looked at her then, startled. Her cheeks colored, but she did not take the words back. The snow fell between them. "I have no pretty way with this," he said. "I have no use for pretty ways." He looked down at his hands. "When you came, this house had walls and no breath in it. I thought I was keeping the ranch alive because cattle still carried my brand. But I was only keeping loss organized." Dorothy listened, her face turned slightly away, as if giving him room to speak without being watched too closely. He continued, "I do not love you because you saved my land. I loved you before I knew you could. I think it started with a knife in your hand and bread behind you, because you looked half-starved and still ready to fight the whole world for 2 children. I did not know what to call it then." Her eyes shone in the dim light. "Silas, that is all," he said quickly. "You owe me no answer, no gratitude, no staying. Your wages are yours. Your room is yours as long as you need it. If you choose to leave, I will hitch the wagon myself." Dorothy looked toward the ranch. Smoke rose from the kitchen chimney, thin and dark against the snow. "When you found me," she said, "I thought kindness was only another door into debt. I thought if I let you carry one burden, you would someday ask for all of me in return." He swallowed. "I never wanted you burden. I know that now." The horse shifted. A bell jingled faintly on the harness. Dorothy looked at him fully. "I still afraid," she said. "So am I. I have children who wake from dreams and reach for me. I have papers people might still hate me for. I have pride that bites before I can stop it. I have no dowry but 2 quilts, a Bible, and a talent for making hard bread edible." Silas' face softened. "That is more than I deserve. And you," she said, "have a temper, a leaking roof, a mortgage, too much silence, and a habit of drinking coffee no human body should forgive. That is true. But when I was short 3 cents, you let me keep my dignity. When I held back the papers, you waited. When that man tried to shame me in front of the town, you stood, but you let me speak." Silas did not move. Dorothy placed her hand over his on the reins. "I could learn a life beside that kind of man." The words were not a kiss, not a promise made under a preacher's eye, but they warmed the space between them more than a stove. Silas turned his hand and held hers carefully, as if trust had bones that could break. They drove down to the ranch in the blue hour before dark. That night, Christmas Eve supper at Broken K was not grand by rich standards. There was salt pork fried crisp, beans with onions, potatoes mashed with cream from Amos, cousin's cow, stewed apples, coffee, and Dorothy's bread, risen high and brushed with butter. She had saved all week. The hired men came in washed and awkward, bearing small offerings. A carved whistle for Will, a ribbon for Lottie, a tin of tea for Dorothy, and for Silas, a new hammer handle because everyone knew he broke the old one in temper, and no one said so. Dorothy set the table with every plate the house owned. Will placed the slate beside Lottie's chair. Mrs. Vale had sent another one by Amos, wrapped in brown paper. 2 slates now, no sharing required unless they chose it. Lottie tied her new ribbon around the hound's neck first, then around her own braid after Dorothy insisted. Silas stood at the head of the table uncertainly. It had been years since so many faces looked to him before a meal. Dorothy brought the bread and set it in the center. For a moment, the room stilled. Silas looked at the loaf, then at her. She understood. Everyone who had heard this story in town would always remember the last loaf. But this one was different. This one was not guarded with a knife. It sat open-handed beneath lamplight, ready to be broken and passed. Dorothy took the bread knife and cut the first slice. She placed it on Silas' plate. Then she cut for Will, for Lottie, for Amos, for each man, and last for herself. Nobody spoke until every plate held bread. Silas lifted his coffee cup. "2 lines that hold," he said. Amos raised his cup. "And women who can read them." Lottie raised her milk. "And hens," that broke the solemnity, and even Dorothy laughed. After supper, the dishes were many. Dorothy began clearing them, but Silas took the basin first. "You cooked," he said. "You will break a plate, likely. You do not know where anything goes. I live here. That has not helped you so far." Will snorted. Lottie giggled. Amos wisely carried cups to the sink and escaped. Silas rolled up his sleeves. Dorothy handed him a towel. They washed dishes side by side, elbows nearly touching, steam rising around them. Outside, snow laid its quiet claim on the yard. Inside, the stove glowed red. Children played softly near the hearth. The men's voices drifted from the bunkhouse later, low and content. A week after Christmas, Silas sold enough cattle to pay half the note and renegotiated the rest, not with Pruitt, who was under investigation, but with the bank's senior partner from Lincoln. The terms were still hard but honest. Hard things could be survived when they were honest. Winter deepened. Dorothy remained. No one announced it. Her trunk simply stayed unpacked. The pantry room became the children's room, with curtains made from flour sacking, and a shelf for slates, books, and treasures. Dorothy moved into the spare room after Lottie asked whether grown ladies were allowed to sleep somewhere they could stretch their feet. The spare room gained a braided rug, a mended quilt, and the blue cloth folded in the top drawer. Silas never entered without knocking. January brought a blizzard that tested every nail in the place. For 2 days the world disappeared beyond the porch. Men tied ropes between house, barn, and bunkhouse. Silas and Amos fought through whiteout to bring in calves. Dorothy kept water melted, coffee hot, and bandages ready. Will carried kindling until he fell asleep on a sack of oats. Lottie sang to a weak calf warming near the stove, while the hound watched jealously. At midnight on the second night, Silas came in with ice crusted on his coat and a calf limp in his arms. "Alive?" Dorothy asked. "Barely." She cleared a place near the stove. Together they rubbed the little animal with feed sacks until its legs twitched. Silas' hands were blue with cold. Dorothy took them between her own and breathed warmth over his fingers before either of them thought to be embarrassed. He looked at her. She did not let go. "Do not make a habit of freezing," she said. "I will try to be more considerate." The calf sneezed. Lottie, half asleep in the chair, whispered, "Name him Christmas. It is January," Will mumbled from the floor. "Then January Christmas." Dorothy laughed softly. Silas felt the sound settle in him like a promise. By spring, the ranch looked different. Not wealthy, not easy, but awake. The east fence stood straight after Silas. Will and Amos spent 3 muddy days resetting posts. Dorothy and Lottie planted beans, onions, and marigolds in the garden plot near the kitchen. Hens scratched by the woodpile. Laundry snapped on the line like small flags of surrender turned victory. The pump handle no longer stuck because Will had helped Silas file the hinge smooth. The barn door hung true. The parlor roof no longer leaked over the chair no one used. On the first warm Sunday, the town held service with the windows open. Pruitt was gone by then, taken to Lincoln to answer questions about records and bank funds. Some folks who had looked past Dorothy in winter now nodded too eagerly. She accepted what was honest and ignored what was not. After service, Judge Merriweather handed Dorothy a certified copy of the corrected boundary record. "For safekeeping," he said. Dorothy looked at the paper, then at Silas. Silas shook his head slightly. "You keep it. It is your land. You saved it. It belongs in your office. Then put it there yourself." So she did. That afternoon, Dorothy walked into the little office off the parlor, opened the drawer that had once hidden the ledger, and laid the certified copy inside a new tin document box. Silas stood in the doorway. She placed the old blue cloth beneath the papers. Silas noticed. "For luck, for memory." He came closer. "Dorothy." She closed the box. "Yes." He held out something small in his palm. It was not a grand ring from an Omaha jeweler. It was a plain gold band, his mother's, kept for years in the back of a drawer, because grief had made him afraid of anything that asked the future to enter. "My father gave this to my mother under the cottonwoods," he said. "I do not ask because you saved the ranch. I ask because when I picture it lost now, the land is not what frightens me most. It is the table without you at it." Dorothy looked at the ring. Through the open window came the sound of Lottie scolding a hen, Will hammering something that probably did not need hammering, Amos calling for someone to shut the gate, and the spring wind moving through the cottonwoods. Dorothy's eyes filled, but she smiled. "I have conditions," she said. Silas breathed out, half laugh, half prayer. "I expected nothing less. The children stay family. I.S. My wages, earned before marriage, remain mine. I.S. You never drink coffee, boiled black past reason again. That might require time." "Silas?" "Yes, yes." "And if I speak in town, you do not answer for me unless I ask." He took that in seriously. "Yes." She held out her hand. He slid the ring onto her finger. It was a little loose. She closed her hand around it, making it fit. They were married in June beneath the cottonwoods Silas' mother had planted. Dorothy wore a cream dress sewn from fabric bought honestly with her own saved wages. Lottie scattered wildflowers from a tin pail, Will stood beside Silas with his hair slicked down badly and pride shining through his solemn face. Amos cried and blamed dust. Mrs. Val brought 3 loaves of bread and set them on the table without asking payment. At the supper afterward, no one went hungry. That evening, when the guests had gone and the children slept with wedding cake crumbs still on their smiles, Dorothy stepped onto the porch. The prairie stretched gold beneath the setting sun. The repaired fence caught the light. The garden showed green rows. Curtains moved in the open kitchen window. Coffee waited on the stove, not boiled to death. A clean cloth covered a loaf of bread on the table. Silas came out and stood beside her. For a while, they said nothing. Then Dorothy leaned her shoulder against his arm. "Do you ever think of that first day?" she asked. "The knife or the bread? Both?" He looked toward the yard, where the hounds slept beside the steps and the hens settled in their coop. "I think of a woman who had almost nothing and still stood guard over what mattered." She took his hand. "I think of a man who could have made me feel small and chose not to." The sun lowered. The cottonwoods whispered. Somewhere beyond the barn, cattle moved toward water that was theirs by truth, by paper, and by the courage of a hungry woman who had hidden proof beneath her last loaf of bread. And that is how home was made at Broken K Ranch, not all at once, and not by romance alone. It was made by bread cut and shared, by coffee kept warm, by a stove that drew clean, by children sleeping without fear, by a man learning to wait, and by Dorothy Archer Kincaid placing the truth where no thief could reach it again.